Thank you kindly for joining us. Great program lined up for you. We're going to be talking about sustainability. We're talking about solar, how to put our footprint, maximizing it, making it a little more eco-friendly here in Charlottesville. We're going to talk about the crossroads of Charlottesville City Hall and how that crossroads is directly kind of linked with the University of Virginia and what everybody's doing from a sustainability standpoint as well. Roger Voisinet helped set this interview up. He is in his third rodeo on this program. Great friend of this program, great ambassador and evangelist, certainly of Charlottesville and the Central Virginia community. We ask everybody that's watching to give it a like and a share. Our team, Harris Tolber, the director, Judah Wickhauer, producer, our team upstairs works very hard to put this program on. All we ask in return is a like and a share. We'll thank some of the sponsors first that make the program possible. First, one of our favorite clients is Interstate Pest and Service Companies. They're very concerned about our footprints here in Central Virginia and the Commonwealth in totality. This business guy started in 1969 with the first generation. Mr. Wells was one man. He had one man and one truck. He would go to his first home, service it successfully, then find the closest payphone, where he would then call his second customer and say, "May I go to your home today?" Now it's a 4-generation strong business with almost 100 employees, a Commonwealth-wide footprint, an office in Richmond, the Shenandoah Valley, and its headquarters right around the corner from Bodo's on Harris. We also want to thank Scott Wagner of Scott Wagner Chiropractic and Sports Medicine. Who's got your back? Dr. Wagner's got your back. He and his team, whether it's chiropractic care, physical therapy, sports medicine, consultation, they are improving people's lives. Why don't we go to the studio cam, Harris Tolber. Let's welcome everyone to the set. First, you know this gentleman here. Roger, hello.
Hello, Jerry. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you for setting this up.
You're very welcome.
Susan Elliott, and I'll allow her to introduce herself to everybody. Jesse Warren at the University of Virginia. Susan from Charlottesville City Hall. Charlottesville City. Why don't we go ladies first?
Sure.
And Susan, what I'm hoping from you is kind of a snapshot of who you are, first from a personal standpoint, and then from a professional standpoint.
All right. So I guess from a personal standpoint, it's always the hardest because I just kind of consider myself a regular person. But I guess the little highlight things that tend to be a little bit unique is I've traveled quite a lot over my lifetime. I had 2 parents who instilled that in me from a young age. So before I graduated high school, I had been to all 50 states and all the Canadian provinces that border this country. My first job outside of undergrad was to live abroad in Japan for 4 years. And really it was a lot of what I saw when I was traveling around Eastern and Southeast Asia that brought me into the interest of how are we building out in an urban manner. Right around that time was when the world's population tripped to more than 50% living in cities, and seeing really the rapid pace of development, a lot of the international construction industries of that, and reading about cities back here that were tearing up their pavement to put in trees, and then seeing cities there that were ripping up their trees to cover it with pavement for automobiles. Yeah. That juxtaposition really brought me into the question of how do we build more sustainably? And so then when I came back into here, I actually came to Charlottesville for University of Virginia, where I got my graduate degree in urban and environmental planning. And then I managed to, as a friend called it, survive through the Charlottesville shuffle until I got my footing and was able to actually set down roots and stay. And so professionally, I now work for the City of Charlottesville. I am in the Environmental Sustainability Division. And what I really try to focus on with my work through focusing on the Climate Protection Program is how do we build more sustainably as a city.
Cool. So Charlottesville has a lot that it's fits your wheelhouse perfectly with everything we're going on here. Put that in perspective for us.
Yeah, so it's great because there really is so much that I can kind of touch and get involved in. If you're thinking about climate protection, it really hits every single activity that there is within the city. So it's exciting because there are a ton of things, different types of projects, different types of involvements that come across my desk. The downside of that is that there's so much and there's only one of me and I have a limited amount of time. So often there's more that I want to be involved in and more that I want to do than I'm actually able to.
We're excited to do a deep dive here with Susan, with Roger, with Jesse. Before we do, first give a snapshot, Jesse Warren, of who you are, the man, and also Jesse Warren, what you do at UVA.
Thank you, Jerry.
Sure.
I am a mechanical engineer who studies energy. So I graduated many years ago, and was given the opportunity to work in the defense industry. That wasn't necessarily for me. So when I got the opportunity to build sustainable buildings for the U.S. military, I said, these are going to be the most sustainable buildings that we can build. Yeah. I used that to build a consultancy within my engineering firm of sustainable practices in the Mid-Atlantic, which transferred me over to the University of Virginia as an energy engineer. I was promoted over top of the energy engineering team about 5 years ago, and now myself and a group of energy engineers, I keep saying that over and over again, identify retrofits for existing buildings across grounds. And we invest in those retrofits and save energy over time.
Cool. How about you personally? What do you like to do? You're a family man. You said you have a daughter.
That's right.
What do you love about Charlottesville?
I have 3 kids.
Wow.
2 of the 3 were born here in Charlottesville,
okay.
Both of which were home births. And I personally enjoy both biking and motorcycling. Today I took a moped, but I see Susan's going to talk about electric motorcycles here in a minute.
Possibly. Turn both of those into sizzle reels. Susan and Jesse, please. Thank you, Michael Guthrie, for watching, CEO of Roy Wheeler. Number of folks watching at City Hall, Jay Wine at Keswick, James Watson watching right now. Roger, same question for you.
I was just thinking, I was studying engineering in 1969 at Miami University, and it was the very first Earth Week. It was happening right outside my window of the library, and I remember saying to myself, I want to make the sun the center of my life. And I started studying solar, even though I had another track. And 3 or 4 years later, I enrolled in our country's first interdisciplinary environmental studies program at the Institute of Environmental Sciences, which is also at Miami University. By the way, I'm going back in September for our 50th anniversary, if you can believe that. So that led me to Montreal, where I worked as an environmental planner with a number of really people that really made an impact worldwide, Paulo Soleri and the New Alchemy Institute and ZoneWorks, and I was a representative at the UN conference with race research at McGill University. And that's what led me to Charlottesville. Bob Monroe became an investor, Bob Monroe of the Monroe Institute. Mm-hmm. And I remember coming here on March 6th of 1977, and I just left the snowstorm in Canada. And I remember looking up on the mountains, and there was a little snow on the caps of the mountains, and women had flowers in their hair, and there was cardinals in the trees, and I thought, this is the place for me. And I want to go back to Canada, especially what I just left. And, you know, winter goes 9 months a year there, of course. Anyways, I love it here, and I used to live on the mall in 1979, right when they're putting the bricks down, and that's where Virginia Solar started, our company, and well, the rest is history, as they say. I have a little story about UVA in 1982 I got to tell you later on.
I'm excited to hear that story. He is an institution here in Charlottesville. He helped set this interview up. I think our first topic, and I think our third sizzle reel here, Harris Tolber, is going to be electric cars and their integration into the Charlottesville, Central Virginia community. Why don't we start with Roger? Roger was one of the, I think this is safe to say, the early adapters from a Tesla standpoint in Charlottesville. Not the first in totality. I think you said that was Joffrey Woodruff, right?
No, it's Andy Reisky, I think, had the first Tesla Model S, and I wanted to get an SUV, so I waited a couple of years.
Okay.
But I was thinking ahead, and that's when I talked to Susan about installing an electric car charger on Water Street outside the Main Street Arena. We got a quote for how much that would cost, and I thought, wouldn't it be great if we could go from solar right to the charger, because we had just installed a 68 kilowatt hour panel system at the arena. So I went to see Susan and Crystal, and we talked about what City was envisioning for the future of electric car charging, networks, and it's growing. I mean, Susan and I could rattle off 30 places within 2 miles of here where we can get a car charged.
I love it. Let me throw that to you, and I'll get out of the way. Charlottesville City, and let's talk about the municipality with electric car charging stations. I'm seeing electric cars everywhere. You sent a phenomenal graphic to me of how sales with electric cars have really skyrocketed.
Yep.
And it's not just Tesla. It's a number of brands that are producing electric cars, and they're becoming more approachable from a price point standpoint. And as the price point becomes more realistic for a lot of folks, they're becoming more ubiquitous out in the market. Electric cars, anywhere you want to go here.
Yeah, so I guess I'll follow up on what you were just talking about. I went to the DC Auto Show a couple months back, and they had a special EV section where you could get test drives, basically, and they had professional sports race car drivers who would drive you around the little obstacle course. One of the things that is really unique about EVs compared to what people have had experience with hybrids or combustible engines really is the torque of how quickly they can accelerate.
Yeah.
And that was what was definitely on demonstration there, where they would line you up and you're seeing, the plastic concrete sort of like barriers down the way, and they would floor it, and you would like get thrown back into your seat. Anyone who's driven a go-kart, that's what usually they'll end up relating driving an electric vehicle to. And it's that instantaneous response, it's the smoothness of the ride, it's how quiet it is. All of those are just basic, like experiential, qualitative features that people really enjoy about electric vehicles. In addition, if you look at what the cost is to fuel the car by electricity versus getting that same energy performance out of a combustible engine, on average in Virginia, it's about a third to half of the cost less. It costs 1/3 to 1/2 of what it would be for a gasoline engine. So in terms of that price point of like your actual operation and usage, there's a lot of advantages there. But one of the things that you mentioned was when it was just Teslas, that was out of the price point of a lot of people. And one of the things that there's a DC area EV enthusiast club, and they actually gave this sheet, which I don't know if you guys can get a close up of it or you want to add it on afterwards, but they list on here 21 different electric vehicles that are on the market right now from a variety of different manufacturers. And 13 of those cost less than the average US gasoline car. So in terms of that affordability, if you're looking at just the cost of an average new gasoline-powered car, there are 13 models out right now that are electric vehicles that are more less to purchase than that.
I'm going to put a graphic in the stream, and I'm going to show it to you guys here. Roger sent this to me. This is electric vehicles from December 2010 to present, and how the various models and brands have sold. The Tesla Model 3, it topped the marketplace. Interestingly, the Chevy Volt in the 2 slot, the Tesla Model S in the 3 slot, the Nissan Leaf in the 4 slot, and then the Toyota Prius PHV Prime in the 5 slot. I'll put this in the chat. I'm going to throw this to Jesse. Sustainability Program Manager, Buildings and Operations at UVA, your position. Electric cars, charging stations, certainly perhaps in that operations piece here. Throw this topic to you anywhere you want to go, Jesse.
So there's 2 layers of this. The first is all of the university vehicles. We have been working on reducing the emissions associated with parking and transportation and the buses and everything over the years. But what I want to drill down into is the fleet that facilities management has. I work in facilities management at UVA, and we have a huge number of vehicles, and we're moving toward electrification there. So we've bought Nissan Leafs, that's what we've chosen to standardize around, and we've got several electric vehicle chargers associated with that. Now, electrification will be a solution for all these types of vehicles in the future, but until we get to full electrification, we are looking at hybrid technologies, we are looking at E85 technologies, and understanding how our heavy vehicles can reduce their emissions footprint until electrification is an option.
I love it. Roger, jump in here.
Have you talked to David Slutsky? I think you have, about the vehicle-to-grid technology being developed at Fermata.
Yeah, vehicle-to-grid is very interesting, right?
Yes.
So what vehicle-to-grid proposes is that we can use these electric cars as batteries to provide additional stabilization to the grid when we're not using them directly.
Yeah.
It's certainly an interesting interesting opportunity that I believe some of our local partners are looking into.
Yeah. Well, just imagine, we got all these batteries in cars, idle for 95% of the time, and the idea is to hook them up to the grid to absorb some of the peak demands, much like they do at Smith Mountain Lake with their reservoir system. So the peak demand only occurs 5% of the time in 5 o'clock in August, the summertime. So that's the idea behind the vehicle to grid, which David Slutsky's
Former Board of Supervisor.
That's right. Right here. I think he works in Danville because it's an opportunity zone or something like that. But he's basically an Albemarle County supervisor.
We got a DM coming here for Susan. Do we expect this with Charlottesville Transit in the near future? That's a good question.
Yeah, it is. So on May 6th, actually at City Council, there was a resolution identifying a couple of items that they wanted to make sure are addressed in our upcoming climate action plan. And one of those was looking at the feasibility of changing the city's fleet into basically carbon neutrality. Like, how do we go into alternative technologies like electrification? So it's like Jesse was saying, you have to look at what's the technology out there, what actually suits what our needs are in terms of what's our driving distance, what's the performance. And so looking at transit is part of that mix. But that's where we are right now, is trying to figure out the feasibility and really how does the technology match.
And wouldn't it be great if all the postal vehicles were electric? The poor postal guys, I live on this little tiny street, and they literally pull up to my neighbor, turn off the engine, walk like 10 feet to the post box, turn it back on, and drive 30 feet to my house and do the whole same. Just imagine the wear and tear on the starters and the whole engine fabrication.
Yeah, folks, go ahead. Sorry.
So it's a perfect use for electric vehicles because they have a home run of about 70 miles a day or less. And so I always ask the postman, and oftentimes they say, well, they're working on it behind the scenes. I think the current postal vehicle is actually made or designed by a German firm. So somebody's working on that, and that would be a great breakthrough because think of how many vehicles there are in the country.
We have folks watching from NBC 29 and the Daily Progress. Charlotte Renee Woods, the climate reporter for Charlottesville Tomorrow, is watching right now. I'm going to throw this to you and then follow up with you. As vehicles, electric vehicles become more approachable and realistic with their price points, what are the other challenges outside of price points that we're not considering with rolling out a more integrative or approachable system across, say, grounds,
Right.
and then also across the city of Charlottesville?
That's a great question. I think one of the challenges I have right now is what's the network going to look like when it's fully built out, right? I see how it's going to work for somebody like facilities management or the post office who's going from home to home every day.
Exactly.
But what's it going to look like when I've got to drive my vehicle to DC and beyond, right? So one of the challenges I know we're having is there's this Resilient Virginia conference coming up later in July, right? That'll be held at UVA at the Darden School of Business. And one thing I have heard through the grapevine is that they are interested in bringing down an electric bus so that we can see it, tour it, take a test ride on it. But how do you get it from here to there if there's no infrastructure in place yet? That is the fear that I have. The good news about electric vehicles is that our electric grid is getting cleaner, right?
Yep.
So right now they're a cleaner vehicle and they're only getting cleaner as time goes on. I can't say that about any other type of vehicle. I love my motorcycle, but its emissions are going to be constant for the duration of its existence, where that'll be untrue for electric vehicles.
Is your department's primary footprint, or excuse me, is your department's primary focus, say, your staff and your faculty and your members on the team and the vehicles that they're utilizing? And the question I have here is, do you consider, say, the students and or their parents and friends that are visiting them and helping them from an electric standpoint?
So our carbon footprint, as the university has identified it, includes faculty, staff, and student commuting.
Okay.
So not so much parents
Okay.
and visitors, but looking at where do our folks live, how far away do they live, what is typical MPG necessary to get them to work, and then how does that fit into our bigger footprint? I'll be honest, that is a hard number for us to influence.
Right.
So the majority of our reductions on grounds are coming from fuel infrastructure, switching to electric vehicles, and making those kinds of emission plays through things that we control.
Why did you go with and then I'm going to throw this to you, Susan, why did you end up choosing the Nissan Leaf?
That was out of my wheelhouse.
Okay.
That was done by our fleet manager.
Okay.
I would assume that was a balance of emissions as well as price point, because we buy these off a state contract, right? We are a state entity, and so we are bound by state procurement regs when we go out and purchase vehicles, for instance.
We put a graphic in, and Roger sent the graphic to our team on the show on all the chat boxes for the show that shows vehicle sales from an electric standpoint from December 2010 to present. The Nissan Leaf, over 135,000 units sold, and that number is rising. Susan, it's a 10.27 square mile city, certainly landlocked, certainly not a lot of extra space for electric charging stations. Seems to me, and I'm a layman, you're the expert, just an average Joe talking here, one of your challenges is space for charging stations. Other maybe challenges for rolling this out across the city of Charlottesville?
Yeah, so I think actually I'm going to step it back out a little bit more, because while the city of Charlottesville does have that jurisdictional boundary, when people say that they're from Charlottesville, they don't necessarily mean they are from within the city of Charlottesville. Right. And so one of the things that's happening at the state level is funds that are coming out of the VW settlement. The state is looking at how do you build that infrastructure out along our main highway corridors. And so some of what Jesse was just speaking about, that also influences that, where we may end up with a charging station that's on 64 that's actually in Albemarle County.
Interesting.
But that could serve the Charlottesville community and anyone who's doing those long distance drives. And as a point of reference, my dad actually owns a Chevy Bolt, so the all-electric plug-in one, and he has driven that from Northern Virginia to Ottawa and back again. Yep. So that infrastructure is getting built out across the country. Granted, that wasn't during blizzards and snowstorms or things like that. And he did have to do advanced planning, but that's coming through in it. One of the other challenges that we end up hearing from people is, well, how long does it take to charge? So if you're doing the fast chargers, the type of infrastructure build out you need for that is a lot more significant in terms of both dollar, but also footprint for those chargers. The way that you then want to manage that is a little bit different as well. Whereas if you're looking at something that's like a level 2, which is equivalent to what your dryer outlet puts out in your home, those are where you really want to have your car parked for like 4 or 5 hours. And so there, when you're looking at how do you build out that network across the city, you really want to think, well, where are people leaving their cars for that amount of time? And, just off the top of my head, it's at home overnight, which if you're in an apartment complex and your parking is provided by the property manager, it's a different sort of control you have on installing a charger. It's where you work, assuming that you work for 8 hours a day. And then usually it's where you go shopping or you go to see movies or some sort of entertainment. And most of those parking spaces are not actually in the control of the city. They're under control of private property owners.
Interesting.
And so when you start looking at how do you build out this infrastructure, part of what comes into play is how willing is that property owner to install those chargers.
Interesting.
Or have Tesla do it for free, like they did at the Boar's Head, Hyatt Place Hotel, Keswick Hall, things. And when Tesla installs their own chargers, they almost always install a level 2 charger as well for free.
Yeah, and then that's a great sort of business-to-business partnership where I think often when people hear that Tesla will install them, they assume it's just for Tesla vehicles. So really making sure that's clear that they also do install level 2s that any vehicle on the market can use is important.
Yeah, I think I sent you some pictures of the Hyatt Place Hotel is a great place to go to visit.
And cue up those photos, Harris. Thank
you.
To
visit what the chargers look like. They have 2 level 2 chargers they installed at their own. Then Tesla employees from Northern Virginia discovered there was chargers. They started staying at the Hyatt Hotel. Tesla installed 2 destination chargers and a regular level 2 charger, so now they have 3. And that led to the first supercharger in Charlottesville at the Hyatt Place Hotel. So the Hyatt Place Hotel is a wonderful example of what can be done.
Are you as part of your your job description, is it forming the public-private partnerships with maybe the landlords and the apartment complex owners?
That's something I could get involved in.
Okay.
I would say our economic development office would be the other office that would most likely be involved in helping to be part of those conversations.
We had Holly Lee on the show here.
Oh, good.
And she was fantastic.
She is. She's everything I've seen her do, she's fantastic at.
Let me throw this to you. Do you see Charlottesville being, and I guess this is a natural segue, and we've touched on it briefly, into the vote that happened with City Council. Charlottesville, progressive, innovative, open-minded in a lot of ways. I mean, I gotta see embracing this as like what's happening in our community. Can you put that in perspective for us?
So I would say it's actually something that on the policy front is still an evolving field. What data we can get from the DMV is not always the most readily available, so I think it's something that we're tracking. Back when Roger approached us with the Main Street Arena idea and using public on-street parking to install a charger, at that point we knew historically for the Charlottesville area had been one of the highest and fastest adopter of hybrid vehicles, but we didn't really have the data on the EV front yet. And that's something that I'm hoping as we go into our climate action plan over this coming year that we'll be able to get more updated data on those sort of vehicles so we can look at it. But I would say it's definitely an area that we need to look at, especially when we look at our transportation sector. In the city limits, not looking at our greater area, about 30% of our emissions come from transportation. And so if you're looking at how do you reduce those emissions, it's either you're trying to reduce your vehicle miles traveled or you're looking at fuel switching. And I would say just looking at what's coming out on the market in terms of vehicles and commitments that manufacturers are making to producing EVs, that's just going to start becoming the norm in terms of what our residents have. And also the visitors to our area. So what we have with that landscape's going to change around us. And I think it comes to a question of how much is that working with private property owners on it. When we're looking at our own fleet, which the question about Charlottesville Area Transit came in before, we also have our own passenger fleet vehicle, and so we're looking at that. We actually have 3 different Leafs, Nissan Leafs from 2012, which was that was a while ago now, actually. Yeah,
7 years.
Yeah, and their newest 2019 model.
It's come a long way.
It really has.
Yeah.
The range you can get on it, the features, they've really been learning every time they've produced a new model, and they've been modifying it in response to what customers' experiences are.
I see the wheels turning over here. I want to get you in the mix. Anywhere you want to go. We have comments coming on the feed. Sarah Hill Buczynski in Crozet says, Pro Renata has chargers in their parking lot out here in Crozet. I'm not sure exactly what kind. Teslas?
And a regular, just like what I said.
Okay, like what Roger
They pay
said.
for that.
Also talking about where, who installs those, if that's Pro Renata or if that's done in a joint venture with, say, Albemarle County or the City of Charlottesville, kind of a municipality partnership. Dave Warwick watching, Brewmaster at 3 Notch. Thank you for joining us. Laura Fonner, Executive Chef at Dooners. Bellamy Brown, who's running for City Council. 2 City Council members watching now as well. Wheels are turning. Anywhere you want to go here.
So the challenge we have is if we're going to install high-speed chargers on grounds that are going to charge your vehicle in 2 hours, how do we get you to vacate that spot after 2 hours so the next person can come charge, right? If I've got an 8-hour workday and only 2 hours to charge a vehicle, I want to turn that spot 4 times. And that's become a difficult question. When the chargers were slow, it was no big deal, right? But now that we've got level 2 chargers, we've got even faster chargers than that, how do we turn that space over to get maximum utilization?
Yeah,
How do you do that?
Well, and yeah, I mean, one of the things, if you think about it, the sort of analogous model is if you think about a fast charger is more like you're going to your gas station. So if you pull up at the gas station, you're waiting for the pump, and you
10
see
minutes
someone
and
go
out.
inside, and you're like, where are they? It's been 10 minutes. It's that sort of a feel. And so if you're like the ones that the state is working to install on the highway corridors, and what I've seen up in the DC area, is when you run your charge card, there is a time limit that if you have not moved your vehicle within 30 minutes, you start paying a much higher rate per minute that you're parked there. And that's how they get people to move. But if it's for your employees, it's a different sort of setup, especially with UVA where you have centralized parking areas and you transport your people. How do you then get them back to their cars to move it?
Yeah, it's become a challenge for us, and something that we're going to have to figure out alongside a lot of other people who have to move folks from point A to point B.
So I read a provocative study because since the average commute to work is like 20 miles, if everyone had a 110-volt charger at the parking slot at the city garage, they could just charge while they're working for 8 hours. They'll get about 20 miles or more for that 110 charge, and that's all they need to go home and where they can charge overnight and leave. So that might be a simple solution that we haven't even thought about, and running a 110 line to 50% of the parking slots in the city or university garage could certainly be doable.
Right. Dominion actually did that with their employee parking lots.
Yeah.
Gosh, I mean, I was hearing about it like 7 years ago, so I'm not sure when they actually installed that.
Yeah.
One of the things is, that I hear often from people is the fear factor of, well, what if my kid gets sick and I have to leave early? What if something happens and I can't be there for the full 8 hours? How much of that charge do I need to have? And so there seems to be a really big peace of mind aspect for people. Usually you hear about it when people are talking about electric vehicles in terms of those long distance trips and that range anxiety. But it also comes into play with if that is their transportation, to say, well, I need to get 20 miles of charge while I'm parked here. What if I have to leave early? What if that doesn't work? What if there's a power outage?
Range anxiety, let's talk about that's the most frequent question I get as a Tesla owner, and Tesla's solved this problem. I don't know if we have time to go online, but I have an iPhone app that shows where all the charging stations are. They doubled them just in the last year. So I've taken 4 trips to Florida and back, hopping along the waypoints. So they're every 150 miles. They're on the most frequently traveled highways. After about 3 hours, you want to stop anyways. And they're always at a hotel or a shopping center or someplace that you enjoy going to, a coffee shop. I'm going to go to Montreal next week. I was just in Buffalo. There's no problem really anywhere. And that goes for Europe, Australia, certain parts of China, and southern Canada. So that's what Tesla's done. And that, however, is a proprietary network. It's not shareable with the others yet. So the other manufacturers
that's the value
will have
proposition
to.
of buying
That's
a
a
Tesla.
huge value. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
one reason they cost more.
Right.
So that's a huge advantage to this manufacturer, and it works. So it's kind of fun. I look at it like sailing.
Yeah.
You're going from one waypoint to another.
Yeah.
Takes a little longer, but it's more of you're in rhythm and we all look forward to the stops. There are one's at the Chattanooga airport, and it's fun to go in there, and they have a virtual. There's virtual boats, and there's displays of all their sister cities. It's really kind of fun.
Yeah, and I'd say one other thing on that is the battery technology across the board, not just Tesla, but
Is
Tesla's
improving.
really, I think, set the expectations of what can be achieved up there for every other manufacturer. And since we had the stimulus funds, tons of money has been pouring into research and development on batteries.
Yeah.
So most of the vehicles that are coming out on the market now, the 2019 and definitely what will come out for 2020 models, are all the higher capacity batteries.
Yeah.
And so those have 200-mile range. So back when it was topping around 100 miles, especially in this area, because people go back and forth to DC and Richmond and over to Stanton so much, people were kind of like, well, 100 miles is close, but I don't really have that comfort zone that that they need. Whereas now, once it's a 200-mile range, people go back and forth, and they're like, oh, this is easy. I don't have to worry.
And that's a great segue to solar, because with batteries and storage and solar and wind combined are now competitive with certainly coal, propane, and natural gas. And I don't know what they're doing at UVA. Don't they have a coal plant still?
Let me throw this to Harrison. I want to get that answer here. So that's the end of that sizzle reel on electric charging stations. We have one question coming in that I think is a good one here.
Okay.
And you've touched on this already. Can you not make this, Jerry, I love the show. Can you not make the charging stations a premium after a certain amount of time, which you've touched on?
They do.
Wouldn't this turn into a profit center for both the city and the university eventually? As the cars become more ubiquitous? That's a good question right there.
Yeah, I think there's opportunities for everybody to be prosperous as we do this. One concern that I have, and this is not something I know a lot about, but I'll throw it out there. We, the university, buy electricity in aggregate from Dominion Power. I don't know that I can sell it back to you, the customer. What I can do is I can charge you for the time that you're attached to the vehicle charger. So if it's $2 an hour to park in this garage, maybe it becomes $3 an hour while you're charging, and maybe it becomes $4 an hour once charging is up.
Fascinating.
So those are the
So
kinds
you're
of
not
tiers.
necessarily a middleman for electric. You're selling time. You're
selling
the
access.
Access. That's
Am I
fascinating.
saying that right?
You are saying that right. There is legislation, though, that and since UVA is like a state entity, legislation, you always have to go back to the exact wording to see who it allows to do what. But there is legislation from the state level that allows people who have car chargers. So, for example, any person who has a car charger in Charlottesville, Albemarle, they do have permission to resell that electricity. Yeah. So you'd have to double check UVA just because it's a special state entity.
So you're basically saying if I had this in my home in Redfield, I could charge my neighbor.
Yeah, and there are companies out there that actually work where you would contract with them, and they would then manage all the credit card running, all of that stuff. One thing that, I'm not sure how true this would hold today, just because there are so many more vehicles out there. But 5 years ago, one of the things that people would find is they weren't getting the volume of users coming in to get that profit cost center. So when they looked at what that monthly fee would be for that company to run credit cards versus what they
There's
would
no
actually
margin,
make,
is what you're saying.
they would be just paying someone to run credit cards.
Right. That's not a business.
Yeah.
Yeah, but like as the question was saying, as more and more of these vehicles are coming out, more and more people are charging, that dynamic changes.
Right. Then it becomes a profit center. Supply and demand. That's the essence of what
Yeah,
you're talking
Tesla
about.
now charges you if you go over your time limit. You've already charged up, and you're still parking. You'll get a bill.
Fascinating.
Fascinating. Because pretty soon, right now the Tesla car charging system has plenty of vacancies, but it's going to end. It's going to get worse and worse as the number of Teslas grow. Last quarter, they produced 90,000 cars.
How do you, as you're an entrepreneur, you see ahead of the market
I
here.
guess so.
How do you see, say, some of the local fuel companies? How are the fuel companies going to respond to this? Are the fuel companies going to become the epicenter for the charging stations?
They could.
Are they going to pivot their model? Because they already have the road infrastructure, the islands, if you may, already there. All they have to do is necessarily flip a switch. Is that what's going to happen?
It's probably starting already.
Yeah?
I think, one of the places that you'll find a Tesla supercharger is at the Wawas.
Yeah.
They're big. They have a big partnership, for instance.
Very cool. Very cool. Let me throw the topic to you that he brought up. Solar panels. Solar panels. I can tell. Are you getting passionate
Big
about
fan.
solar panels? Solar panels, UVA, open-ended, and then I have some specifics for you anywhere you want to go.
UVA's got a goal to reduce our carbon by 25% against 2010 levels by 2025.
Wow.
That's an absolute number, so it's not a per capita number. So as we grow, we have to offset all of our growth in addition to reducing where our footprint was in 2010. We have invested in all kinds of technologies across grounds to reduce energy use, but we've also invested in 2 off-site facilities, Hollyfield and Puller, that are approximately 40 megawatts DC together. That enables us to reduce the greenhouse gas footprint of about 30% of our electricity, and that's going to power us to being able to meet that climate goal this year. So the question for us becomes, well, what is the next iteration of our climate goal? Is our climate goal going to be more aggressive, and how do we get there, and how do renewables figure into that?
Interesting. What are you thinking, Roger?
I was thinking of how UVA's come a long way, because I'll tell you a little story. In 1982, I offered UVA a free $150,000 solar pool heating system on top of the natatorium. And the only obligation UVA had would be to buy the BTUs at a 25% discount from natural gas. It was a win-win. And it wasn't something novel. We had just done this at the Waynesboro YMCA, which is still going. So the Waynesboro Y board took about a month to say yes, and the UVA team took about a year to say no. And their excuse was, well, $10,000 a year wasn't very much savings, and the solar panels may blow off the roof or something. That was their excuse in 1982, 83. But look what we've accomplished now in 35 years. It's taken a long time, though.
We've come a long way, and what I will say is we are still looking at ways to connect the chiller plant to the pool so that the excess heat from the chillers could heat it instead.
That's what they do at ice rinks, where they heat the adjacent pool at Mount Vernon Ice Arena, for instance.
Cool.
It works.
Susan, jump in here.
Yeah, so solar has a lot of potential, and one of the things that I would encourage anyone who's listening, if you looked at solar 5 or 10 years ago, take another look at it now. There's this term that's called energy density, and what that means is the amount of electricity that a single panel, like per square inch or whatever, can produce. And that number has it's some crazy rate, which I don't remember off the top of my head right now, but that has drastically increased. So what a panel used to be able to produce, now, just to make up some number, but it's like double that. Like it's really been a really steep increase in terms of that. Maybe one of our listeners can get some actual numbers on that.
I gave you guys a picture of the Southern Railway office building in 1982.
And Harris, you got that out? He'll put that on screen. Thank you, Harris Tolbert.
So the panels there were like 50 watts, and now they're 310. To give you an idea, from 82. And maybe you'll see the picture coming up.
He will. He'll cue it up.
So more than my double.
More than double.
But when you start looking at like what the cost of that is, the entire industry has grown too. So you can install for less now. The equipment itself is less, and the equipment is going to produce more per minute of sunshine on it than it would have 5 or 10 years ago.
Dan, I was going to ask that question. Go ahead.
24 months ago, when I was doing some quotes, maybe 36. It was $9 a watt. Now it's less than $3. That's it. Can you see that?
I'm currently shopping for solar for my home.
Yeah.
And I'm looking at prices between $240 and $260 a watt installed, which is far less than I was looking at a couple of years ago.
So put this in perspective. My buddies just did this. And I had buddies that did this 5 years ago. And their sliding scale was if they were going to break even. And the reason they did it 5 years ago was they were like so committed and passionate about leaving their footprint better than when they first arrived.
Right.
Okay, they're passionate about it.
Right.
But like the sliding scale when they were going to break even, and I'm throwing a number off here, I don't know the exact number. It was like 17 years prior to them breaking even. I have now buddies, and then I'm going to throw this to you, that live in the city of Charlottesville. The city of Charlottesville is incentivizing solar installation. That are doing it in the city of Charlottesville. That number has shrunk dramatically.
Yes.
Can you put that in an approachable setting for the viewers that are watching?
Sure. I did the math on my house, and at my house, I calculated that over the next 20 years, I'm going to spend about $45,000 on energy, or about $30,000 if I go with solar. So for me, that's a $15,000 savings over the course of the next 20 years. It's not going to offset.
What was the quote for your solar?
How many watts or
No,
how many
what
dollars?
was the dollar?
Installation.
Probably 18,000.
It was 18,000 or so, and then I take 6,000 off for the federal investment tax credit, right? So as y'all may know, as everybody in this room probably knows, we get 30% back on our renewable energy purchase this year. But as we move into 2020, that number reduces to 26% and drops from there on out. So I'm making the bet that panel prices are not going to drop more than 5% next year by pulling the trigger this year.
Right.
Interesting. This might be a dumb question here. For the folks that are watching, that $18K for installation, is that a lump upfront sum, or do they offer a plan of some kind to offset the opportunity cost of putting the money down up front?
Different vendors have different plans.
Okay.
Because I'm an energy engineer, I'm really looking to buy the box of parts. If you want a full turnkey service where they can amortize it over the course of many months, there are plenty of providers who will do that for you.
And that's just like a mortgage.
Exactly.
Okay.
Precisely.
Okay.
Segura Solar could help you with that. Plenty of others could help you with that. For me, I'm looking for how do I get the lowest cost per installed watt, and that's because I'm comfortable specifying the charger, the inverter, specifying the panels, etc.
Fascinating. This has got to be a sizzle reel, please. The fourth one. I won't make you work any extra time for this. This is just very intriguing. Start with my question, please, to Jesse, and let's continue here with Susan involved. Andre Xavier, CEO of CVille Hop on Tours. Thank you for joining us. Charlottesville's incentivizing, right?
We do. So we adopted it was years and years ago, actually, that you get a percentage back as a credit back on your property tax if you do solar. But really what we have been trying to do is working with different partners to then help promote different things that are happening.
And what do you mean by that? Like the installation companies?
For example, the Local Energy Alliance program ran another Solarize campaign, and so we helped promote that in the area. There was a solar co-op that ran their first one where they actually looked at doing solar plus EV charging for residents. And so we were helping with the promotion and the outreach of that to make sure our residents know that these programs exist.
Right.
And then we really up to those program experts to say, this is how it works, this is what the best package is. But with both of those, they've been able to, number one, provide that assistance, because a lot of homeowners don't necessarily have the bandwidth to ramp up and learn everything that an engineer would have. But so they try to help walk through this process. And both of the models of how those programs work is different, but one of the things that the leading organizations of that do is they build that relationship of trust, and they do that research and then explain why this product, how this product compares to this one, and why someone might want to go with option A versus B.
Well, you're doing a phenomenal job, because the awareness is much greater now than what I remember. In fact, I remember, I'm going to throw this to you, taking a bike tour with Charlottesville Community Bikes, the bike organization right across from Quality Pie, phenomenal organization. We literally took a bike tour around North Downtown, Hogwaller, and Belmont of homes with solar panels on them.
I organized that.
Yeah, it was,
That was mine.
it was amazing. It was so fun.
Yeah, so the other fun piece with that was intentionally woven in was on the idea of being more sustainable. So it was a bike tour for a reason, and we tried to use bicycle infrastructure that the city installed in low volume roads to help people understand how they can get around town without having to feel like they're in direct competition with vehicles.
Wow, it's touching us on many levels, Susan.
What's lost in all that, we used to do that same thing in the 80s. What's lost is solar thermal is still more cost effective than solar electric, but it's completely fallen out of favor, and none of the solar installers even know how to do it. In the 80s, we had 60% tax credit, 40% federal, and speaking of local incentive, 20% state. Can you imagine that? Now the state's been absent for 20 or 30 years.
Why do you think that is? Just can't
politics.
do it? Yeah.
Politics. You know, we're still a tobacco state, and I don't know how it even passed in the 80s, but it was a little more. At that time, we were fearful of running out of oil. Solar was considered positive by both parties. Any event, it used to be we did solar tours, and it was all solar thermal. And I bet on your tour you didn't see any of that.
Well, we pointed it out when it was on a home, for sure. But I would say the other thing that's really raised awareness of it is that we have like a little bit less than a dozen of renewable energy companies that are headquartered here in Charlottesville. And a number of them are all part of an association called the Charlottesville Renewable Energy Association, so CVille REA. And they have done, I think, a really good job of getting out there, talking to both business owners, but also working with residents and really talking about what the product is, how can just that offset what your bills are. But then they, several of them at least, I've heard anecdotes of when they've been working with a customer, they look at the whole energy profile and they've found other opportunities to suggest some small operational changes that end up having thousands of dollars of savings.
Let me throw this to Jesse, and then you jump in here.
Sure.
Start to finish, solar at your house. The time for installation, and I'm trying to make this super approachable for everybody. The inconvenience potentially for the homeowner. If you could put the inconvenience, if there is, in perspective from the installation standpoint. And then we're also getting the question, how quickly are you recouping the savings, Mr. Warren, on the fee?
Let me start with the first question. What are the challenges, right? And you've been through this, so you could
Yeah, we
probably
have
talk
solar
about
in
it
our
more than
house,
I
too.
could. But I don't think the inconvenience is going to be much.
Okay.
I think the challenge for us is looking at the age of our roof and deciding if those panels are going to need to come down during the life of the roof for replacement. So that's the thing that I'm really struggling with and trying to budget for. 12 years from now, I'm going to need a new shingled roof. So what's that going to mean from a solar perspective? And your second question was about break-even points when we become profitable on this investment?
Pretty much what they're asking. Yeah.
So-
which is a good question.
Yeah, it's a great question. What you will find if you do this work yourself is that it is very sensitive to how people think the cost of energy is going to escalate. If you think the cost of energy is going to escalate at 2.5% a year, then solar is going to be incredibly profitable by year 20. I'm not that aggressive. I use number about 0.5%. So believing that our energy prices are going to go up less than 1% a year puts me break even at around year 11.
Well, I mean, I would think, and this is just as a businessman talking, and then Susan, jump in here. As solar becomes more, proliferates the market and becomes more ubiquitous, energy has got to combat that ubiquitous nature of solar and the price points becoming lower by then saying the price of electricity cannot go at 2.5%. It's got to go lower to keep people hooked on the electric juice.
Right.
I mean, it's basic economics. Is that a dumb way of looking at it?
I would say it this way. We have looked at the escalation factors that Dominion uses for their own estimates, and those numbers have dropped dramatically over the last few years. If you took their escalation estimates from 5 years ago, when your friends probably installed solar, you'd be making very different decisions than today, because we just haven't seen the escalation that was predicted, and the escalation that's predicted moving forward is much, much lower.
You're basically saying they can't corner and bully the marketplace anymore.
There are too
Because
many
there are other
options.
options.
There are too many options.
Yeah, and options breed power, and with options, it impacts supply. I mean, totally get this. Susan, this is great. I love this.
Yeah.
I love this. Susan, what are your thoughts on this topic?
Yeah, so
You did this yourself, your family.
We have it on our house, yeah. So I guess, yeah, there's like 50 different thoughts in my head right now. So one of them is solar panels are now warranted at 25 to 30 years. In the city of Charlottesville, at least, you are going to be hard pressed to find a property that you can generate 100% of your electricity with your on-site.
Right.
So you're always going to have some supplement that's coming from the grid and from Dominion. We are in an area that is it's a state-sanctioned monopoly, so Dominion is the only electric provider that is allowed to operate within the city of Charlottesville. And so if you can't generate all of your electricity on site yourself, you're going to be coming from Dominion. And so in that sense, what they choose as their supply blend is what they choose as their supply blend. Now that is going to be determined by a lot of economic factors, so it's not like they just will sit there and randomly pick something out of the air. One of the things that we saw when we updated our, calculated our 2016 greenhouse gas inventory for the city was that there was a significant drop of the emissions on our electricity sector, even though our electricity usage as a community went up between 2011 and 2016. And that in large part is because the fracking and natural gas started coming online and Dominion was shutting down their coal plants for natural gas, which has less emissions. And so that decision wasn't because someone sat there and just decided, I'm gonna go choose natural gas. It's because there were market forces that were at play. And so that's a lot of what ends up happening of what Dominion provides as its fuel sources. One of the other things that happen or can happen at a state or national level is different regulations. So there's the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, which Virginia does not yet have, but a lot of the pieces that need to be in place to make that happen have gotten put into place. And that is something that would then help to use the market to shift and start bringing in more renewables. So that's kind of what you need to get off of the grid. Going back to what you can do on your own property with that. So panels are warranted at 25 to 30 years. Most roofs are
Similar
not
to a
expected.
roof.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, similar to that. They're
Yeah.
actually now longer than most people expect roof lifetimes. So at some point, you're going to have to take your panels off. We actually just had to do that. So
Dang. Is that expensive?
it wasn't actually as bad as we thought.
Okay.
In terms of for initial...
For a new roof, that's why?
Yeah, we had to.
Okay.
Yeah, we were replacing the shingles on the roof.
Okay.
And so the hardest part of that is you end up with two contractors, and they said they were coordinating with each other, and then one was like, no, the other one hasn't coordinated with us at all. But that was the hardest part of it, was just being that kind of conduit to make sure that the two groups were talking with each other. In terms of the solar install, the way that process went was we had a local company come to our house. First, when you call them, they will actually look at an aerial image and help do an aerial desktop assessment of what is the potential for solar on your property. In general, Virginia has really good potential for that. So it's more site-specific conditions about shading or like the angle direction of your roof. And then they'll come on site and they'll take a look at it. They'll give you an entire financial markup, including what they assume the escalation rate is going to be, when you're going to get your payback period. Now, when you get your payback period is a dynamic that rests entirely between what is your amount of usage of electricity each year versus what your panels can produce. And so every home is going to have a different ratio there. But that'll
So you're
end up
basically saying
affecting
if you have 5 kids, they're super plugged in with electricity, or they're super plugged in with solar, you're going to use more usage than an empty nester family.
Potentially, yeah. Likely,
Yeah.
very likely, yes.
This is freaking fascinating.
So for us, our payback ended up getting calculated out to be somewhere between 10 to 13 years.
And your family is how large?
2 people.
2 people. Fantastic, fantastic. We just saw you jump in here
That
and
was my
end the
house.
sizzle reel and Roger's commentary here. That was Roger's house.
That was my house, yeah. I was thinking of something different. I was thinking what we're talking about at a much grander level is the expertise of 2 local companies that are country leaders that we're so blessed to have here. And you guys know who they are. It's Apex Clean Energy, started by Sandy Reisky, 220 employees here. They're now they've always done wind, now they're doing some solar projects. John Stone, who was one of my tenants, was in charge of that. He's just leaving. And then we have Coronal Solar, whose name has changed again. Susan, do you know what their new name is? Because they had merged with Panasonic. They used to be another name, and then they became Coronal. Now they're a third name. And regardless, they just do utility scale solar all over the country. Very little actually in Virginia. So we're really, really, like we're the center of
Solar.
Of renewable energy in the whole country here with regards to these people who put together the deals. They know the cost of land, they know the cost of money, they know the cost of the manufacturing. They go over to Spain and buy windmills. You should have these guys on the show.
Well, I think you're the one that can make that
I tried to get
happen
them
over
here.
here.
They're actually too busy.
Devin Welch's outfit is reaching out to
Well,
us.
Devin, I invited on, and he couldn't come today either.
We'll see if, and Devin's team is watching now. We'll see if we can get them on the program soon. That was the end of that sizzle reel. That was one of the most fascinating ones. Harris Tolbert, thank you. Appreciate you, pal. I would see, and guys, we're already 55 minutes in.
Really?
Yeah, so this has been easy peasy. You guys crushing it. I would think eventually you're going to see a vertically integrated company as the marketplace continues to innovate and evolve, where that company is going to be able to do the installation and do the new roofs. I mean, like, why is that
Tesla
going to be?
solar roof,
Yeah.
which is what they're trying to do, which is, it's asking a lot of a product, isn't it, to be a roof
Right.
and produce electricity. Well, they're making the panels in a factory in Buffalo. I tried to go visit last week, but they don't have visitors. So it's just now starting to be a real product. I think they did it in California for a while. I know Michael Allenby tried to get a Tesla. He got a quote for redoing his whole new roof. I think it was $80,000. So he put it off.
Festy,
So
Michael
that's
Allenby.
got Michael Allenby.
Yeah, he's good people.
Great guy. Anyway, so you might see those around here, in a year or two.
Because there's no reason Susan and her family should have to ask as a liaison or
Two
a conduit
people, yeah.
between 2 different companies. Because that's probably a pain in the, what.
It took more time than we would have liked,
Right.
yeah. And one of the things that I've started to see are that some solar companies are starting to have direct partnerships with roofing companies, mainly because
Like it's a
it's two
preferred
different.
vendor?
Yeah, it's a preferred vendor. There's different skill sets in this, and partnering with a company that is well known, that has a history of knowing what they're doing, particularly the roof. I mean, that's such an important piece of an investment in protecting everything that's inside of that building. So having a roofing company that has that credibility, that history of being able to say they know what they're doing on that front, to then be the direct partner. So you contract with one, but you end up getting both, rather than one company trying to then learn an entire new skill set and bring it in-house. One of the other places that you see this is, so we're right now talking about the idea of like solar in your roof. One of the other pieces that comes into play when you're looking at how much bang for your buck can you get out of your solar goes back to that, what's your house energy demand? And so if you can reduce the demand through things like upgrading your insulation or your air sealing, things that then, once that's in place, are very passive in how you use your property, you're lowering your energy demand, which means your solar can cover a larger percentage of what you're actually using each time.
At
Makes
Main
perfect
Street Arena,
sense.
we did solar there, but that was like a 10-year payback. But we replaced all the metal halide lights with LEDs, and that was a 1-year payback. Because think about it, we turned the lights on in the arena, and it created 50,000 BTUs an hour, 5 tons of coolant or of heat we had to overcome when we're making ice. So that one little investment, I think it was $18,000 for the LED lights.
Yeah, and you'll
Paid back on 1 year.
and you'll see, especially for like bigger commercial properties, is there's things called energy savings performance contracts, and the companies that do them, they come in and they assess your LEDs or your lighting. If you don't have LEDs, they assess your HVAC systems. They can look at every single component of that, and then they look at where you can save energy, and they'll put that together in a package where your net result is that you're going to end up with cost savings. And so with that, they'll take things like switching to LEDs, which has a much quicker payback, and they'll pair it with something that has a longer payback so that it can start to meet whatever the metrics are for approval within that business.
What do you guys know about these devices you put on your electric panel that monitors each circuit? I know John Semmelhack's working in that field a bit, and there's a local company, forget their name.
Lumen?
Lumen, is trying to do something. You guys, have you looked into that?
No, we've been looking at sort of other technologies on that end. What they're interested in is how do we use the Internet of Things to help reduce our energy consumption in buildings.
I think that's a Joffrey Woodruff company too.
Well, he's an investor. I think,
Yeah, we're moving, at least in UVA, we're working on a whole building level. We haven't really figured out how to get to the Internet of Things level, but I think that presents a lot of potential for homeowners and individuals.
Yeah, particularly homeowners, I was thinking.
Yeah.
Thomas Streffs, and Thomas, I'm butchering your last name, I'm sorry, but he's contributing to the show. He says, great show, Lumen is the answer we're looking for. You brought that up immediately. Sun Tribe, he was talking with Devin Welch. Thomas, thank you for joining us. A lot of questions coming in. We have 90 seconds left. I'm very mindful of everyone's time here on the program. A lot of media outlets watching right now. I close the show with kind of a final word where you guys can go in any direction you want. Since you're the first time on the show, we'll let Roger go first so you can give that some thought, okay? Roger, I want to give him some positive accolades. He helped set up this interview. He is a true evangelist here of Charlottesville, and he has his hands, I think this is safe to say, in a number of things. Real estate, solar, electric cars, just a lover of Charlottesville in general.
Yeah.
You're fantastic in this setting as well.
Thank you. As you are as well.
Thank you. Thank you. Anywhere you want to go, Roger, the show is yours.
Oh, well, I didn't know I was going to say anything. Remember last show we talked about the future of ice skating? So I'm still firmly convinced that it should be at the university. And we actually have plans for solar and geothermal and a lot of energy-saving technologies involving the engineering and architecture students, should we get that far. And our next hurdle is to firm up some land at the university. And I'm hoping President Ryan can help there, because we've done 2 or 3 years of solid networking behind the scenes. I've been working on it since '87, to tell you the truth. So let's see what happens up at the other location. But I love to think we could have an energy efficient, sustainable ice sports facility for the community.
I think you're going to make that happen.
Yeah. That's just a little
I think you're going to make that
between
happen.
you, me, and 150 other people.
Let me throw it, ladies first. Susan, anywhere you want to go?
Yeah, so I would say both in the areas of electric vehicles, but also within solar. For a long time, there was kind of an impression that it wasn't that attainable for most people, and that's just the way it was. And I would say in both of those spaces, the market in that space has been changing drastically. And so if anyone kind of has already preset conclusions about those, I would encourage them to really be open-minded about looking at how has it changed, and then take a new look at those. If there are gaps in that, figure out what those gaps are, why it's not right for you now, because those spaces are rapidly continuing to change. And I would suspect that those gaps are going to really, many of them are going to close over the next like 5 years or so. Both of them are very applicable for here in Charlottesville, and there's a lot of opportunities coming. So I'd encourage people to take a look at those again.
Thomas is a big fan of you. He says, I'm here to help come up with the companies that Roger has right on the tip of his tongue.
Thanks, Thomas.
Yeah, Thomas, thank you for watching. That's one of your friends on social. This show's going great. Jesse, we're going to give you a final word here. We didn't even have a chance to discuss, because the hour's flown by, the integration of lime and bird into the marketplace. And I'm a huge, huge proponent of lime and bird. They have gotten some, we'll talk about this in another show, but some negative attention. But I think anytime you can get less traffic on the roads, that's good for the municipality and our community in totality. That's a topic for another day. Anywhere you want to go, Jesse?
I think we've talked at length about electric vehicles and renewable energy, but I just want to make sure that we remind everyone that energy efficiency and reducing the amount of energy that we consume in buildings is the cheapest way to get to net zero, right? And so if you have any questions about how to do that in your home, for instance, there are resources like LEAP, the local energy efficiency nonprofit, who can do home energy checkups to help you reduce that climate footprint regardless of what your exposure to renewable energy technology is.
I love it.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I love it. This was such an easy roundtable. You guys are pros. We will archive the show in totality on ilovecville.com. I encourage you to check it out. We will also take the sizzle reels and push them for 30 days across our network. We're truly grateful for Jesse and Susan and Roger for setting this up. I want to give you another round of props here. The bike tour was so fun.
Excellent.
I mean, it was so fun and so approachable, and like average person can just like rally around it and learn about it and just like understand it. Huge fan of that. We close the show the same way every time, guys. We ask everybody to embody the golden rule. We don't make it about religion. We do make it about treating other people how you want to be treated yourself. It's the golden rule. I think Charlottesville needs the golden rule more than ever. Not just Charlottesville. I think the country and the world need the golden rule more than ever. Please think about it. My name is Jerry Miller. It's the I Love CVille Show. We'll see you tomorrow with an entrepreneur's journey. Chill Bill is going to join us. Chill Bill's Italian Ice. We have David Toscano on the docket as well. He's going to join us, I think, this week on Thursday. And then one of the gentlemen who are running for Albemarle County Board of Supervisors in the Whitehall District, Steve Harvey, will join us on Wednesday to spotlight his campaign for Board of Supervisors. I'm Jerry Miller for Harris Tolber and Judah and the team upstairs. It's the I Love CVille Show on the I Love CVille Network. Have a good afternoon. Good work. So fun.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, so fun.
Cool. Thank you.
Easy peasy.
Yeah.
Thanks, Jerry.
Thank you.
For
Thank you.
the home energy checkup that Jesse mentioned at the end, both the city and the county are subsidized.